All of our productions at GCTV are sponsored in part by Bay State Health, providing the care you and your family need when you need it close to home. Visit them online at baystatehealth.org. Greenfield Savings Bank. Visit them at 400 Main Street in Greenfield. Call them at 774-3191 or go online to greenfieldsavings.com. Greenfield Community College, providing access and excellence in higher education in the Pioneer Valley. Visit them at gcc.mass.edu. The Hammond Family. The Hammond family are longtime supporters of Greenfield Community Television. New Fortune Chinese Restaurant on the Mohawk Trail in Greenfield. Visit them online at newfortunema.com. Call them at 772-0838 and check them out on Facebook. Real Cleaning Services, cleaning Hampshire and Franklin County since 1972. We don't cut corners, we clean them. Check them out online at realclean.com. Call them at 413-422-1143. People's United Bank, located at 45 Federal Street in Greenfield. You can call them at 774-3713 or visit them online at peoples.com. The Solar Store of Greenfield, replacing fossil fuels and nuclear power one home at a time. Visit them at 23 Fisk Ave. Call them at 413-772-3122 or visit them online at solarstoreofgreenfield.com. Thank you to our sponsors for supporting all of GCTV's productions.
Hi, folks. Welcome. This is the special Ways and Means meeting of February 27th. I will now call the roll. First, I'll call this meeting to order at 6:02. This meeting is being recorded by Ways and Means Committee. If anyone else present is doing the same, please notify me at this time. Seeing none. Oh, yeah. Are the mics working? Is the mic working? No. What about now?
Oh, there you go.
Testing 1, 2.
Okay. All right. We're back in business. I'm going to take the roll. Councilor Wheeler is present. Councilor Mayo? Here. Councilor Mass? Present. Councilor Dolan is not here yet. Councilor Alice?
Present.
We have no minutes to approve, no public hearing, no motions. We're going to skip right to discussion. I'd like to invite the mayor and his financial team to the table for questions, please. Let's see. Can we hand Councilor Dolan's packet? Yes. Yeah. Pass those down.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Okay. Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, councilors.
Good evening, Mayor.
Is my mic on? Yes.
I hear it.
We thank you for this opportunity to come before the Ways and Means and discuss the current and future debt proposal for the city of Greenfield. We're going to focus on a number of items, and hopefully you can follow along with the printout of the PowerPoint as well as a PowerPoint on the screen. I think we've all agreed that we'll take questions at any time so that we can make some continuity of thought. I just want to start off with thanking the finance team who helped put this together over the past several months. Our finance director and city accountant, Liz Gilman, and Kelly Varner, our treasurer, along with special thanks to Lindsay Rowe, who continues to keep all of the conversations and paperwork in order, and and so that we can still end up with a good thought at the end. Special thanks also to Lynn Welsh, who's our financial advisor for the city of Greenfield. We thank her for making this trip and bringing the eastern part of the weather with her. So I guess we're talking about a couple things. First is affordability and capacity. I want to say that even though the fire station and the library are connected on the same parcel of land in Greenfield, the discussion on the fire station goes back to 1994. We had our first survey done. That complete survey is linked and our website has been there since last summer. The continued surveys and assessments and recommendations by engineers and architects over the past 25 years are numerous. The conclusion, however, is always the same. The conclusion is that the fire station is not structurally capable of continuing on a safe basis for the vehicles and the firefighters. So after the last proposal that was not accepted by the council on the lease purchase and for the public safety complex, we followed the advice and recommendations to find a town-owned piece of property, which turned out to be the Beacon Street, Riddell Street section that the town had taken by tax title and voluntarily, virtually tax title several years ago. Over that time, we have spent some grant money to clean up the site. We had a previous owner had cleaned up the site in the late 90s with a final phase 5 from DEP, and we felt comfortable in doing another cleanup. So the entire site is cleaned up except for one small corner on what would be the southeast area and the inside of the building. The continued Pacheco Ross that we received from the council, $50,000, I think it was about 2 years ago. We had a balance left in that account. We already had a lot of work done on the building from the slab up, but we had a different site, so we asked them to fit the building that we had on the site that we recommended. Ironically, the site is across the street from an earlier survey done in the early 2000s and in the mid-2000s, where Holy Trinity School was determined to be the best site in Greenfield for a public safety complex. We, of course, didn't act fast enough to get that site, still didn't have the ability to do it at that time, and it was obviously purchased by the hospital. Being across the street with this site, we felt, after checking with the planning and construction, the fire and police chiefs, they also agreed that across the street was as good as the other side. So we moved on that, and only this past Monday did we receive an update and a recommendation from the architect from the Pacheco Ross, Mr. Dennis Ross, and we sent a copy of that to everyone, I think, today. We received five finished copies that are given out to public safety and the chiefs to review. And we'll continue working on that, trying to get some final numbers. When you do notice the numbers, it's been estimated at 12.5 million. In the debt graph, it's actually less than that, that the architect has estimated the cost to be. So,
What page that's on there?
What?
The cost.
Try the last page.
It is toward the back.
Yeah. For the debt or for the fire station project?
It's,
That's on the letter by Dennis Ross in summation, and he mentions 9.5 to 10.5 million.
Okay, I see.
You got it? Thank you. I wasn't sure it was that last page or not. What we're planning to do is get into more details on that, so we'll have some actual costs, and it's still a little bigger than we anticipated. We're not going to move dispatch, and so we've got some modifications to go with that floor plan and square footage. But tonight we want to show, can we afford it? Can we afford to do what we've done? And I have always asked the question, you know, can we not afford to do what we want to do? I know many people have said that we're doing an awful lot. We've done an awful lot. You know, we're a small city, and we're poor, we're rural. We can't afford all of this. I want to point out that many of the projects that we've done has huge leverage. So, for instance, the new high school is $66 million, had a 80% reimbursement grant. The parking garage had $10 million, had a 75% reimbursement grant. So even though those two big projects, it was an opportunity, and with the leverage, it was very helpful to get that done now and take advantage of the relationships and the grant opportunities. This building you're in was estimated at around $5 million and ended up at 4.5, I think it was, and the council had reduced it a little bit, but we still came in under budget and on time. We have other projects planned, but can we do them all? So, as I said in the beginning, it's a great opportunity to come before the Ways and Means and explain how we think this is affordable. And not only from the mayor's mouth, but from the people who really do the counting and the preparation of numbers and the planning in the future. And at this point, I'd like to just introduce Lynn Walsh to give us a brief overlay and answer any questions as well.
Good evening, county members, committee members. I'm here tonight just to give a very broad overview, really of two really important aspects that sometimes get confused when we talk about debt and debt capacity. And I just want to start with capacity, okay? And that is really a statute, if you will, that cities and towns issue debt, districts issue debt based on your equalized valuation. Okay, and so 5%, we have a normal debt limit and what we call a double debt limit that needs special approval, but most cities and towns work within the normal debt limit. And the normal debt limit being 5% of your equalized valuation, okay? And so for the most recent, we've just got new numbers out from the state on your equalized valuation. In Greenfield, you know, a simple 5% is about $75.1 million is what we consider your debt capacity. And what's included in that number is only debt that you've approved, okay, which is inside, what we call inside the debt limit, under Chapter 44, Section 7, if you will. Anything that you've assigned to that is counted towards that valuation. So for instance, any water purposes are what we term outside and not part of that calculation. School debt, like your high school, that's under 70B, that's MSBA, is considered outside that limit, if you will. Okay, so just on a rough, and I did this as these numbers as of the beginning of fiscal 20, so July 1st of 19. You know, we're halfway. Can you hear him? Is that okay? Is that okay?
Yeah, it has to be close to
Hear me?
your
Okay.
mouth, please.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that. So just a rough calculation, if you will, and I'm looking at capacity of what we'll be looking at as of July 1st, 2019, which is the beginning of your fiscal 20. And it includes the issue of bonds that we will be selling in the beginning of June, okay? So that has been incorporated into the calculation. Okay. So your capacity at that point in time, okay, and that again includes all the authorized debt that you have outstanding, all the bonds outstanding, is about $50.9 million, close to 51 million if you wanted to round it up. Also in that calculation, we have to take out anything that is authorized and unissued. So the debt limit is calculated at the time that you authorize, not the time that you borrow, okay? So we have approximately 705, or the town has approximately $705 and 5,000 authorized unissued that is against that limit, okay? It doesn't include the 100,000 in water mains that the councilors voted in for 2018, and it does not include the 5 million note that the town has out in the broadband, because that is considered outside the debt limit. So when you bring all those pieces together, okay, of what we will know come July 1st, your debt capacity is now $50.2 million. I ran the library because we have to, even though the library is grant funded, the law states we have to use the full authorization as voted. So we have to include that, even though we know in a few years down the road, the library grant amount that's part of that authorization will be rescinded. Okay, so that will ease up capacity. I did run the fire station at the high number of 12.5. So even including those two large projects, and I also added back in, because I understand that the councilors just rescinded about 8.1 million in authorized unissued debt, leaves the town in a snapshot of about $27 million left in capacity. And that's after considering two large projects. Just to speak to, what else do we have capacity for the normal CIP program? Can we still sustain that? So looking at this and doing the calculations, that's still sustainable. So that's what we call, that's just capacity. And then you got to look and you dig in the weeds and you look at the individual issuer themselves. What are your policies and procedures for issuing debt? Greenfield runs their desire is to run 8 to 10% of debt to expenditures, which from the rating agency standpoint, that's a normal average percentage, if you will, for somebody the size of Greenfield. So then we have to take a look at what can you issue then. We know we're good on capacity side, okay, as far as numbers, but are you going to be good on your own policies, this 8 to 10%? And as we look at this, I know Liz will be speaking to numbers that are going on, but there's ways that we structure debt, and again, it's a very fluid discussion, whether you issue short-term a piece, okay, whether you issue the bonds all at once and you incur principal payments sooner, or whether you issue bonds in phases. Those are really to be determined when a cash flow is vetted out, but it will always, to be towards the eye of how do we fit into that 8 to 10% debt, if you will. And one other thing I want to note too is a majority of your debt is the high school debt. Okay, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but which is exempt. Okay, so when you go in and you're looking at your budget, your operating budget, and you have that debt line item, that gets carved out. Obviously, we still look at all the debt, but when you look at really what the budget will bear, we carve that piece. Obviously, you carve that piece out because it goes on your recap on your DE1. So looking at the picture of debt, okay, as far as what we're looking at on July 1st of 19, the beginning of fiscal 20, the town will have about 45.4 million, which again includes the 2019 bond issue that we will be issuing in June. And it includes both, all categories of inside, outside the debt limit. So that's your total debt picture. If we take out the 21.6 million that's roughly left of the school, the town is about 23.8 million in outstanding debt. Again, that includes enterprise as well. Some other things is, you'll have 30% of your debt retired in 2024. I think that's kind of the earmark that I've been told for maybe the principal payment for the fire station, or the library, excuse me. In 2025, you'll have 35%, which I think is going to be the next project for the fire station. What's
Right.
that?
I just want to point out that that is graphically represented there, the reduction in the debt.
Let me ask you a quick question there. Don't we have to build the fire station before the library, and therefore wouldn't we bond for the fire station before the library?
Then I've reversed my, is it 20?
Is that correct? Has she reversed it, or is it incorrectly calculated on the graph?
Which graph?
So you're
sorry.
speaking of the graph, the current general fund debt, or this is the projected debt payments?
You have the yellow is the projected library, you have the green is the projected fire station is what it says, so that is, you just reverse the thing, it's okay.
I think
see
graphically,
another color on here.
yeah.
Is your question answered?
It is, but that's having color.
Thank you. We don't-
And just a few other things, again, like I said, the structuring of debt, very flexible in how Greenfield can issue debt, whether it's, like I say, short-term pieces going into long-term, whether it's level debt, level principal. There's many things that we can do to fit that in, knowing that you've got that 8 to 10% threshold. And the other point to make is, once you there's the argument of let the debt just go. Why do we need to maintain that debt budget? The prudent thing is, as we all know, and we all live under Prop 2.5, is once that goes out of one line item, it goes to another. And trying to then build up a debt service budget after that is quite difficult. So our recommendation is to work with the finance team here, should these projects pass, and make sure we have that level capacity going, again, different sort of capacity, but that level debt going across, so that you can maintain that debt service budget. One other factor I do want to mention to you tonight is the change in the Modernization Act, which passed in 2016, allowed municipalities to use the net premium, if you will, that you receive from the underwriter on the day of the sale of your bonds, to use them one of two ways. And I'll just give you an example of an issue that I'm working with is building a fire station. They are going to issue 2 issuances of bonds, 2 years apart. The first issuance is $5 million, okay? They get a $500,000 net premium after you get the cost of issuance, so it's $500,000 that's coming in cash on top of the par amount of the bonds. The law now allows you to put that to project cost. So what we do on that issue, we put it to project cost, that's $500,000 that they don't borrow and pay interest on. Okay, so we go down and we get to the next tranche of bonds, the last piece, the project is going to be completed, they don't need any more proceeds, but chances are you get a decent-sized premium. So what we do on that side, that day of sale, instead of putting it to project cost, we don't need it, we put it to reduce the size of the bonds. So the net effect basically means that chances are, very good chances are, the way the market is bidding bonds, is that when you go out to issue, you will most likely not issue the full amount that you authorized, because you will have premium from the bid going into the project. So that's kind of a new nuance. I mean, usually before the Modernization Act, you'd get premium, and you'd have to, put it on your DE1 form or float a general fund.
Thanks, Ms. Welsh. I can either, Director Gilman, I can go to you, or maybe I think it makes more sense if councilors have questions for Ms. Walsh.
That's what I was going
Yeah,
to
why don't we do
say.
that first? Councilor Alice?
It's not specifically for Ms. Welsh, but it's a question. So is there a spreadsheet that we can get that actually has the numbers on it instead of just the graph?
Slide.
I'm sorry?
Next slide.
I mean, that we can have.
Oh, It wasn't
All
in
we have
there?
is a graph. I need the
Well, they
numbers
didn't give
behind it.
the-
Okay, I'm sorry, but we'll put it up. Can we put it up for now till we give it to you?
Sure. I'm just afraid that I'm not going to have many questions tonight because we're just getting it now. So,
Just
sorry?
getting in now. I think
Well,
you had it before.
Yeah, it's the same one,
Same
except
one.
I added a
Had it
column.
5 times.
It's the same one as which one?
Here, we're bringing it up
Have it
right
right
here.
there.
Is it the
Okay.
same one we received in February?
Yes.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
because I wanted to bring this up, because I knew people were interested in the numbers, and I believe there were at least 2 counselors that were concerned about years 24 and 5. So what I asked to be done was, after the total debt, I asked for a column to be added that says how the debt fluctuates from year to year. And so you see those concerns in year 24 and 25. But I want to segue on what Lynn was speaking about, structuring the debt. This is presented in the most conservative manner.
Worst-case scenario.
Worst-case scenario, right. So this is where the most expensive choice was made up front on the loan repayment. This is heavier in the front than at the end. Yeah.
Councilor
yes.
Mass?
Can I ask a couple of worst-case scenario questions? You said you didn't include that GSAT was excluded. If GSAT fails and the 5 million the town becomes responsible for it and it's no longer part of an enterprise fund, would that $5 million be included? And how would that affect this?
You would be on, yeah, you would be on the hook for the 5 million.
That is
absolutely.
correct.
My talk to the 5 million was to the state capacity,
Right.
the normal debt limit.
Right.
Did you
But-
include it in the 5 to 10%?
8 to 10.
I'm sorry, 8 to 10%?
It is right now out in short-term issuance. Did you include it in the, in here?
No.
This is all, no, this is all
permanent
this is
finance.
all general fund debt.
So the bond premium, so the payments as a percentage of operating, if GSAT were to fail, and I'm not saying it's going to fail, if it were, we'd go over that 10%. Is that fair to say? At least in 1 year, maybe 2.
Well, no, you're correct in that it would be assumed, but I go back to the restructuring of debt, and I can let Lynn give you more options on how you can structure the
I
debt so
see.
that it doesn't hit so much in year 24 and 25.
So it would require an additional restructuring than the structure it currently has.
Well, we haven't
There is no-
structured.
There is no
There is no
structure right
structure.
now. It's,
We're just presenting worst-case scenario with most of the payment being paid up front on all these debt projections going down the road.
because, they have the note coming due, I believe it's in October, is their $5 million note coming
Right.
due. And we've had initial discussions with them that they are in a position where they need to make a mandatory pay down. And I am told that there's sufficient funds. They would have liked to have had some flexibility, but the law doesn't allow for it, and DOR couldn't see their way to giving them an advantage that they don't give to anybody else. So we do expect that 5 million will be paid down. That is in their budget. They'd like to keep it, but they have to make a mandatory pay down on that.
Second worst-case scenario question, if I could, on the same thing.
Yes, and then we'll move on to other questions from other counselors.
You said that the high school is excluded. The other MSBA bonding that's out there, for example, the Green River School, is that included?
That is excluded as well.
That is excluded?
Anything that you have under 70B is not counted toward your capacity level.
When you're speaking capacity.
Are
As
you-
far as repayment, yes, it would be
It's
in.
included in the 8 to 10%.
Yes.
And if the Green River School is not reoccupied by students, and there's a clawback from the state for the 70% reimbursement, and we're responsible for that, are we, because it's currently closed. This is currently a closed school that the plans for reopening are still in the planning stage. If we have to pay that, does that bump us up over the 10%?
If they pull the grant, Yes, then you are responsible for any of the bonds out there. Now, was this under the old school program?
Green repair,
Yeah. It was under the accelerated repair program.
I think that's
Okay,
it.
so you have only incurred then costs that belongs to you as far as the bonds are, because you didn't finance the MSBA share.
But if there's a clawback from the MSBA, aren't they going to assess us the share that they paid for? Aren't they going to take it off of our cherry sheets at least? Maybe it reduces revenue and doesn't increase our payments, but reduces our revenue?
Reduces your revenue, yeah.
So it would
Yes.
reduce
Yeah,
the
you'll pay
operating
for it. You'll
budget.
pay for it at some point, yes. If it is closed and it's an asset that you've got bonds out on, and they've given you the full grant, and it's no longer in use as a school, then yeah, you would take a hit. Might not be on your bond side, but it'll be on your operating side.
One other point I want to make in this payment structure is that the fire station is in there at 12 million. And we know now that it is not 12 million.
Not going to cost that
No,
much.
I know, but, you know, in terms of GSET, I think that is somewhat of a buffer.
I'll take a question from Councilor Dolan.
Just a follow-up on the Green River School. For those of us who were not on the council when that went through, what is the outstanding balance?
Pardon
Or
me?
what would that clawback look like? Is it $500,000? Is it $10 million?
I don't think I have.
Approximate is fine.
I don't have that with me.
We'll have to get the, we don't have
Actually,
it.
actually,
That
I was
worst-case
just looking
scenario
at the
question.
final report that was to be signed off this past fall. I think Mark Smith had given it to me, and I believe it was 912,000.
think that was
I will
Federal
confirm, pardon me?
I think that was Federal Street.
No,
Was Green
Mark
River?
gave me Green River. So we'll get back to you on that. Okay.
Councilor Alice.
Yes, in the last 10 years, what years were we above 9% as a percent of our general budget? 9% or over?
I don't have the history. I will tell you that up front.
Okay. Because it appears, I don't know what was retired, because I still haven't received that information in those 10 years.
Oh, I thought the treasurer sent that to you.
I couldn't find it in my email, so I don't.
Oh, okay, I'll
And I
I'll
don't think I
double
ever
check
saw,
with.
if it's there, I would like
Okay.
to see it. Okay, so I'd like to get the answer to that question.
Okay.
And when was our last bond rating, and what, was it an increase or a decrease? And what year was that? Do you know?
I believe the last issuance last fall, there was
Last
in
fall.
October.
Yep, there was in
October of 2018.
Of 2018. We went out and did the ban, actually, it was the ban issue for the 5 million. And S&P confirmed the town's AA stable rating.
So it stayed the same, it
It
did
stayed
go
the
up, didn't
same.
go?
No.
When was the last change to our bond rating?
God, I don't know when the last, it's been quite a while.
Either up or down?
Either way, either
Well,
up or
I don't
down.
think you've gone down.
Okay.
We've gone, our rating
You've
has gone
gone
down,
up.
has gone up.
Yeah, I mean, that would, you're a AA now, that, I don't, Greenfield was never a AA plus or a AAA rated community. So you haven't gone down.
Right, okay. So I'm just, so my question is, I'd like to see when that rating changed and what percent we were at the preceding years, probably 5 years before that, of our operating budget, to see, because I'm not sure that we've been in the 8 to 10% range over the past 10 years. And if we have, it's been on the low side.
And
So I'd like to see
Can I,
those.
can
I'd
I
like to
just
see those numbers.
qualify something when I present you, I can go back and look in the S&P history for Greenfield. But you have to note that the criteria that goes into a rating, debt is only one small piece of it. You could have a community that has very high debt levels, but they have very well-written policies. They have historically managed in a high debt level capacity. There's reserves level, liquidity levels to look at. So, I mean, just to say, and this is just a very broad statement, it just doesn't speak to Greenfield, is that your debt level is one variable among many that goes into your credit rating. So I just don't want, when you see that there, the correlation of, okay, we're under 7%, and then we went lower, and then our bond rating went up. It's not because of one variable. It is a component of it, but not the only variable.
Councilor Alice.
I understand that, but in fairness, it's being sold as though we need to be within 8 to 10 because that's going to help our bond rating. That's the
No,
that's
I-
the
I-
That is true.
no, that's what
Well,
the public is seeing that's coming out. So
Here's my understanding from being the outsider, looking at, okay, I'm numbers. Numbers don't, there's no politics here, it's just numbers. Is that the 8 to 10%, okay, is a level that the rating agencies are comfortable with, okay? And the town has taken that recommendation and has made it, whether it's written or handshaked, that's their policy, and that's what they want to live within the 8 to 10%.
Councilor Alice.
yeah, and I'm not arguing that that's our policy or that it's right or wrong. All I'm saying is that we historically haven't been in that range, to my knowledge, and that's why I want to look to see. I don't disagree that we have the capacity, we have the legal ability and authority to borrow. We have all of that. I never argued that. That was never something that I brought up as an issue that we couldn't do it. I'm just looking at the fact that over the last 10 years, our taxes have gone up very significantly. And I won't get into that whole thing right now, but they have. And if we're going to increase the debt, and I get the restructuring, that sort of just pushes it out further, so that when you get further out and you need to do more things, well, we're just going to be in the same boat again because we're going to have to continue to bump it up or restructure farther out. So that, I had one more question, but I'll defer for now. I saw other hands.
I'm going to let the mayor speak and then take more questions from councilors. And I just want to note that while obviously we don't have the information about our previous debt levels, it's not something that I have off the top of my head. I would note, personally speaking, that there has been a history of disinvestment and deferred maintenance in this city, and that the potential to raise our level of debt would hopefully counter some of that historical trend. Mayor?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and that's part of what I was going to say. We have learned, at least I have learned, and the different people I've worked with over the past 10 years, we have learned that investment by the community is an investment in the community. So that has brought about positive change. Let me just say, we are in the same boat, or the reference to the same boat in 2030 by Councilor Ellis also means that, was there something wrong with that boat? There's nothing wrong with that boat. If we can stay where we are now in 20 years, great. So there is a good strategy in reinvesting in the community, repairing, replacing institutional parts of our community that is, already 265 years old. So I wonder if, I'm not sure what the investment was, whether we were 8 or 10%. The reason we adopted this best practice in the past 10 years is because the rating companies like it. S&P and Moody's, we're AA minus, which is the fourth highest. I know it has been suggested in the past that we could be a B community in next year or two, virtually impossible to drop that far from 4 to 16. So that's not going to be the case. Our strategy, as indicated, is with the 30% paid off in 2024 and 35% paid off in 2025, those short-term bonds are really a plus. So if we take the, and I've said it several times, the debt limit, I'm sorry, the debt payment is a line item in our operating budget. Our operating budget in those numbers you're looking at increases at I think it was 2% a year, which is very conservative. Maybe 1%, whatever the increase is very conservative for an operating budget. That means the 8 and 10% increases annually. So that new debt payment, I don't want to get convoluted and confusing here, but that new debt payment in the operating budget, if not used for infrastructure and improvement in our city, gets transferred, as Lynn mentioned, to other departments. And we have good departments and good missions. So if there's going to be a consideration for moving money from one line item to another because you disinvest, then I don't know how you're going to recover by 2030.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Dolan?
I would just, I have a clarifying question and then another question. So is it fair to say, just as keeping a good set of policies is good for us as a town with relation to the bond rating, also keeping this 8 to 10% threshold is also good?
Yes.
It behooves us.
Yep.
And there's no downside necessarily. With
For the 8 to,
relation-
with the
yeah.
8 to 10%?
There is a downside for being under 8%, even if our bond rating doesn't go down immediately.
Well, I don't think going under the 8% as far as, that's not really a rating issue.
Yeah.
As more as it is what the mayor just spoke to about losing that line item amount in your debt service budget.
And
From the rating agency standpoint, when they look at, communities, is one of two things that happen in communities that have very low debt. They have a lot of cash that they can do pay-as-you-go, or they're not maintaining their assets.
my other question was, in your professional experience, which I'm sure is extensive, how common is it for a town in Massachusetts to push up against that 10%?
Different communities have different percentage levels of where they want to be. Some are right up there. They live by the 10% rule, and that's where they stay. That's where they're comfortable with. And but the other thing is you have to have projects that support that. These communities that bump up against that have large capital projects going on, continuously going on.
But would you say at any given time there are communities in Massachusetts that are around that 10%
Yes,
area?
yeah. If not,
Okay. It's not that
there's some that are
uncommon.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Councilor Mass?
So I want to ask a question about just the numbers and the mayor's suggestion about the operating budget being at 2%. That 2% is an assumption. It says it's an assumption in here based on historical trends. My review of historical trends don't put it at 2%. If that figure is 10% less, if it's 1.8%, that pushes us further up towards the 10%, perhaps over the 10% limit. Is that correct? If that assumption is wrong, the whole
Well,
graph
I
shifts.
think, Liz, you have a graph in here that shows what other capital items. Is that?
No,
is
no, no,
that's what
the
your
operating
question?
budget. If the operating budget doesn't go up 8% a year, but only goes up 1.8% a year, which I believe is closer to what we're at, doesn't that shift the entire 8 to 10% lines
Yeah,
down?
as you know, you're living with it in one bucket. And if one is not being funded, then it's going to take from someplace else.
Follow up to that, so our operating budget is usually a condition of revenue collections. So if we have I can't tell what's going to happen in 2025. If there are state aid cuts to local aid, or what I think is a more likely scenario, if our projections for revenue from the parking garage for that $2.5 million that we got to pay back don't come in. the standard thing that most communities do when they have revenue cuts is they cut operating budget, isn't that correct? Because you can't cut the capital.
Yeah, right. The capital is what it is.
And
right.
that would
It's
also
operating.
push us further away from that 8 to 10%.
Absolutely, it could. Yep.
But new growth would also balance that. So there's a lot of variables here that we're not, sure of, because we can't be. Councilor Alice?
So just over the last 10 years, the average increase of our operating budget was 1.65%. So it's 0.35% lower than the assumption. So it definitely shifts, and in 2025, it's definitely over 10, and possibly in 2026. And this is a perfect case scenario. That doesn't take into account any of the general obligation bonds that we may possibly do that could be more than what's projected on the sheet. Is that correct?
Can we bring up the sheet again, please?
And
Lindsay? Okay. No, I just think it'll help.
well, there was, on the sheet that I'm looking at, and unless it's changed, which I just asked if we were using the same one, and I think we
Right.
are. In FY '23, it looks like there's a projected general bond issue of 4 million. Is that on there?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so if that one is like this one, which is, where is it?
The
So
14
this
million,
year was 4.7 million, the one that we're doing in FY '19 in May.
that includes fire station.
No, the
Oh, no, I'm
general
sorry.
bond
You're
issue
correct.
does
You're
not.
correct.
no.
You're correct.
I'm saying the general bond issue for FY '19 is 4.7. So if we get to the general bond issue of FY '23, or even FY '21, because FY '21 shows 3.5 million. So
Correct.
already, if it's the same as this one, that's 1.2 million more. And then FY '23 is 4 million, that would be 0.7, so 700,000 more. So I mean, I'm just saying, these numbers are the best case scenario,
So,
but if we're stacked against the 10% and one small thing changes, we're going over that. And we're going to have a jump from today's levels of debt payment or debt service of 3.8 to 2025 of 5.4 million.
I'd love for you to answer that in whatever way you could, but also you spoke about the way that the debt is structured. Would that affect what Councilor Alice is saying?
Absolutely, and that's what I would suggest here, is that perhaps I'd ask Lynn to possibly give us some of those different structure scenarios so you can see what it does. Because we're presenting the worst-case scenario. And so to restructure the debt differently, then you can see what it's going to look like in '24 and '25.
Councilor Mass.
I'd like to come back to this 2% operating budget assumption. It's sort of been suggested out in the public, and I think not very well explained, that these projects will not result in an increase in taxes. If the operating budget goes up 2% a year, and there's no corresponding increase in revenue, people's taxes would go up, correct?
You could, yeah.
You can't go beyond
Can't go beyond Prop 2.5.
2.5.
Yeah,
I
but
was
Yeah,
taxes go up, even in Prop 2.5, people's taxes go up annually.
if you have excess capacity and you use it.
No, even if you're within your capacity, if you raise how much you're spending and you don't have any additional revenues, taxes are going up. If we're not getting anything else from the state, our taxes are going up. Because it has to come from property taxes, right?
But you're still
you-
confined by
you
Prop
still are
2.5.
confined by
Yes.
2.5.
We can't go up more than 2.5%, but it doesn't stay the same, right?
The 2.5 is always an aggregate
This is not a hard
number.
question.
No, it isn't, and 2.5% is fixed by law, so it
Yeah.
can't go up to more than 2.5%. Every operating budget
not
has
ask-
that option, and yes, taxes go up.
Okay,
Show-
thank you.
Show me the scenario where the taxes go down.
Well, I'll get there. So if Counselor Alice is correct,
He isn't.
and
Let me explain.
You don't even know what I'm asking about, Mayor.
Well,
So-
you're assuming that the 1.65% is now the average increase in the state, in the city budget, where we have calculated 2%. So 2% on this chart, any change in any number on the labels on the above will change everything else in the chart.
Let me try to ask my question, Mayor. If Councilor Alice is correct about what has historically happened, if historically we have only gone up 1.65%, and now we start going up 2% a year, doesn't that mean people's taxes are going to go up more than that what they have been going up on an annualized basis in the past, absent additional revenue?
So yes, but the idea that there would be, and that'll be a short yes, because the idea that there is no additional revenue is not real. We know we have additional revenue coming. We also know that if you reduce the 2% average of increased budget, then you only reduce the average of the debt line item. So it's not that you lose tens of or hundreds of thousands of dollars. You have the debt issue of an increasing budget. If it goes up 2%, then you have a greater 8 to 10% gap, canal to fill in for debt. If it goes up 1.65%, you still have an increased canal of the debt line item. It doesn't go down. So the debt line item goes up annually.
Councilor Dolan, you had a question?
Right, the 2% increase.
All right, Councilor Alice.
So we have just under 2.4 million in excess capacity as of last year's budget. I'm sure that will go up this year. The question is, can that $2.4 million in excess capacity be expended in one budget, the entire amount, even though that's significantly over 2.5%, because it's 2.5% that was not taken in the past years?
No.
You can only do, so you can only take 2.5%, so that
In 1
excess
year.
capacity cannot be used.
Goes away.
Doesn't go, it's been carrying over for the last,
No, the excess is what you don't use. You can't go above 2.5.
so you can't,
You
because this is,
cannot go above the tax levy of the prior year by 2.5, by more than 2.5.
that's not what we were told in the past. So I'm happy to hear that if that's true, because that's not how we would been told in the past of the excess capacity piece. So that's good to hear. So that
But you, like,
alleviates.
let's say in the current year, there is 2.4 excess
Right.
capacity. Let's say 2.5, you could have less capacity in your subsequent budget. You don't have to use all the 2.5, but you could use a little more. We've been historically staying under the 2.5, okay?
Well, historically, he's not been using it at all. Isn't that correct?
No.
No, we
Been
use
using
parts of it. We've
We
had
use
some
parts
years
of
where
it.
we didn't use 2.5 at all.
At all, yeah.
Oh, okay.
But for many years, as you note with the average of the last 10 years, 1.65% versus a max cap of 2.5, we're under the 2.5.
No, that was 1.65 was the total operating budget. The actual yearly increase in the tax rate was 2.56%.
Tax rate doesn't mean anything, it has more to do with property valuation than it does
And the
taxes
property
paid.
valuation in those same 10 years went down 0.25%.
It
So
was a global recession. Do you think the last 10 years should be the responsibility of the citizens of Greenfield? Or the leadership?
I'm not suggesting any of that. What I'm suggesting is that in the past, it was understood, and maybe I was confused when I was hearing it, but that by not using the 2.5% and leaving that in excess capacity, that it could be used at one shot later on in a budget. And if you're telling me unequivocally that can't happen, I'm very happy to
I
hear
will
that.
confirm it
Me
for
too.
you.
Do you know the answer to that?
No, no, you're right. But I'm
thank
just
you.
saying, you're saying wipe out that whole unused levy capacity. When you look at that, that's a black mark, if you will, for your rating, for your bond rating.
So it's not possible to do it's not possible to use it all in one
No, you
fell
can't
swoop.
use it all in one fell swoop.
Oh. Okay, I'm so glad to hear that, because
Yeah.
that's not how I understood it
Um,
from multiple years past.
Because what you'd see, conceivably, you could see that
That'd be a huge problem.
it would, yeah, absolutely be a huge problem.
That alleviates that
You know,
point, thank you.
I mean, that's part of your overall flexibility, if you will, on budget, that you have unused levy capacity, to bring it close to zero, or to not even have a policy. I mean, there's, you know, and that's one thing, again, if kicking the can down the road here, is that, you know, it would be probably in the best interest of the town to develop these written policies and procedures that's signed off by the councilors at some point in time. So it acts as a foundation for no matter what or who comes in with any agenda, if you will, that is Greenfield's foundation of how they run their finances.
Councilor Mayo?
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, this question is probably for you. This is a comment and then a question.
Grab a mic.
Okay. Thank you. First off, the comment is, when I first became a city councilor, one of the first workshops that we went to was to talk about the numbers of Greenfield and what we had to work with and what was fiscally responsible to use and things of that nature. And I'll also preface by saying I'm not a numbers guy. I'm a people guy. I'm not a numbers guy. But we were told that it was always in good measure to be in between 8 and 10. Is that, do you remember that as that workshop?
It was at the new counselor
Yes.
finance workshop.
Yeah.
I attended, not all of them, but some of them.
Yeah. Do you remember that being a good number between 8 and 10%?
Yeah, the 8 to 10% is a best practice
Yeah.
for communities. So we don't have to reinvent the best practice.
Right.
So we follow the best practice.
And Greenfield has been following that.
Yes.
Historically, what percentage of Greenfield what have they been operating at historically? And I'm talking about, we don't have a lot of figures here, but I would say 10 years ago, were we operating between 8 and 10? And in your opinion, has that been beneficial for Greenfield?
Yeah, can't give the answer for 10 years, and we'll get back to Councilor Ellis's request for prior 10 years. It's a best practice because it allows you to do some infrastructure improvements and try to stay abreast of what's happening. The 8 to 10% is just a guide. As Lynn mentioned, many communities are over 10. We have in one of our credit rating reports by Standard & Poor, I believe, there's a comment on the ability of communities to continue to reinvest in their infrastructure and other institutional buildings as a view of the healthy financial condition of the community. So rather than abandoning or letting things be rehabbed at a later date, we kind of keep up to date. I just want to make a quick note to the reason we have excess capacity is because I have not used 2.5%, which is an automatic. Most budgets use the 2.5% because it's automatic. You don't go to the voters. I've always been sensitive to the taxpayer and said so many times that when you sit down at a table in the city of Greenfield in a municipality, there is no representation from the taxpayer. So I take on that role as the taxpayer rep and look for the efficiencies, look for the shortcut, look for the thing that's going to save money, look for good materials and resources that are going to save us funds and time. The reason we have 2.4 million now in excess capacity is because it's 2.4 million we haven't used over the last 10 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Mass?
I share Councilor Alice's a little confusion about the statements on excess capacity, because it is not what the last two financial directors have repeatedly told us in arguments to spend more money. But I have two bottom line questions. If there's a statement that if you do not spend this money on capital, it will go into other line items. That's at the discretion of the council and the mayor, who can choose not to put it into those line items. If we don't spend that, if we were to build the fire station, but not the library, how much would the average taxpayer save if we don't put it into anything else? How much would they save?
Well, it's not debt excluded. So
No, if
it's
we
a-
don't spend it, we're not making any payments on it, right? How much is the average taxpayer going to save?
I think, let me try to answer that. I don't think we can calculate that at this point, but there's sure there could be a calculation. But let me further be clear about the debt payment in our operating budget. For example, if there is an extra $1 million that we do not have to pay, it will be used in the budget because other departments will still have an increase. So we will then use that existing revenue that's already authenticated and use for the other departments that have called for an increase, and the 2.5 doesn't get used.
And if the council
So-
cuts that corresponding amount from the budget of those departments that you add it to, if we don't allow you to spend it, if we just say no, and we don't spend it in operating, and we don't spend it on debt, how much does the average taxpayer save? How much does this cost them if we have the political will to do nothing? And I'm not saying we're going to do that, but I want a real figure on the table so taxpayers know what this means.
Well, we had conversation from the library presentation that said it was $71 a year.
But I'm
Based
not-
on $186,000.
They also told me that they don't know anything about finances, so that's why I'm asking the finance people.
Well, you're asking the finance people to come up with an answer in 15 seconds. So we'd
I'm
need
happy
time
to, I'm happy to get it sent
Right.
to us later if we can get how much the difference is.
This is,
For both?
No, if we do the fire station but do not do the library and don't put that money anywhere else in the operating budget, what is that for the average taxpayer?
Because the other variables that would need to come up with that calculation is, are we going to use the 2.5 or not use 2.5? Because we're talking about a total operating budget finish.
You have already assumed 2%. Use your
Okay, so we'll
existing
use the
assumption.
2%.
Use your existing assumption.
then-
If we don't spend the money, how much are we going to save?
So using the 2%.
Right.
And using current or negotiated CBAs, collective bargaining agreements.
If we do not spend this money, I don't care what you spend the rest of the money on. If we don't spend this money, how much is it going to save off of your projected budgets?
I think we're making this more
Little more
complicated
complicated.
than it needs to be. Whereas the library and the fire station are both our estimates are both in the range of $10 million. It's an easy, I'm not going to do it on television, but we could easily do this math on a piece of paper, $186,000 for a median house, and it's going to be in the range of
71.
$80
Right.
per taxpayer.
I would just like to comment, too, that you're assuming that we will be putting no money into that library building down the road, and we all know it's in major need.
And that's what we come down to when we talk about best practices, when S&P talks about best practices, is that it does not behoove us to make a decision to try to save the taxpayer $80, when in fact, we might come back in 5 years and have to build an entirely new building because we've gotten the recommendations on how to renovate this current library, and it turns out that it's not only is it expensive, but it's actually not even feasible. And so that's where I sit now. I don't see renovating the library as even an option on the table. When we started this discussion, when I first became part of this discussion over a year ago, I did think that that was part of the discussion around whether or not to build a new library. We at least have to know what it's going to cost to renovate the old one. And since I've gotten more detailed information, I don't think renovation is even on the table. But I'll take a question from councilors now. Councilor Alice.
Yeah, I guess, so, I guess if we're talking about the renovation, I have some questions about, well, because I don't know the answer to them. I have questions about the fact that we spent $40,000 to do a study of ADA compliance through the whole town, and we received that report. It's 460-something pages long, and it says all of the buildings, it lists them all out and how much it would be to get them to ADA compliance. And the library came in at $64,000. So I'm trying to understand, either we need to get our $40,000 back for the study that said it was $64,000 if in fact it's really $7 or $8 million, or we need to figure out where the $7 and $8 million came from. And I've seen nothing other than an off-the-cuff memo saying $7 to $8 million. So what can anybody answer the question of why we spent $40,000 on a plan that came back with one number, and then we have a number that's thousands of times higher or hundreds of times higher? Can anyone answer that question?
I'll start with part of it. We used grant money, $40,000 for a mandated ADA study for the city of Greenfield. It included everything from complete streets, sidewalks, doors, and municipal buildings, and many, many other things, as you know from the 400-plus pages. So it was not an engineering study or a structural study or a financial study. It was, how can we get the disabled into this building and be ADA compliant? And so if it was $64,000, then that would have been continuing with the back door, maybe putting in a new door in the bathroom. So the ramp is from the rear of the library, the bathroom is you can't get in a wheelchair. There might be other issues with the staircase. It's the very minimum, including the sidewalks, which, you know, we saw that there were many more sidewalks that needed to be revamped or restructured than the 64,000 type estimate for the library. That's the best I can tell you. The $7 or $8 million came from once you go over 30% of the renovation of a building, you're required by law to do the entire building 100% to the code of yesterday.
Councilor Alice.
Right, but if the $64,000 is what would make us ADA compliant, it doesn't go over the 30%.
That's true.
Okay, so I guess that's my question.
Oh.
It was not a structural study, and it was not so the $78 million off-the-cuff amount was based on the fact that you'd have to go through and completely re-engineer the building to the codes of today.
Right. That off-the-cuff remark was by a registered architect who deals with municipal buildings all over New England. The idea, maybe it comes down to a value judgment. Do you want to allow certain people in the population to come in the back door and squeeze their wheelchair into a toilet? Or do you want to put up a new building that's going to be 100% ADA compliant?
Thank you for the answer.
Councilor Mass and then Councilor Dolan.
So we asked at the last council meeting where this was discussed, a question. Now that we have our financial advisor here, I want to re-ask the question. Can there's a projection of $2 million in fundraising, and now that a compromise is on the table that is realistically the only way I see this passing. There are some people who are threatening to withdraw their pledges towards that fundraising. The fundraising is at $700,000 now in pledges, not collected. Is it possible to appropriate this money contingent on raising the $2 million? Can it legally be done by the council? Not whether it's practicable, can it legally be done?
You could put language in your vote to reduce. You could vote the library.
yes, and
And
that's
then
what we
put
do.
any grants, gifts, shall be used to reduce the loan order or the authorization.
But my under,
I'll recognize Dan Pilata.
There has been, oh, go ahead.
You can do that from the appropriation, I'm sorry. You can do that from the appropriation standpoint, but you must fund the entire appropriation and have the entire appropriation available by the April deadline with the MBLC. So that must happen, or you will not receive the grant.
Follow-up question on that. So if we appropriate the full amount and the $2 million is not raised, either it doesn't finally reach its goal of 2 million, or they get the 2 million in pledges, but the pledges fall through, they only collect a certain portion of that. That reduces our revenue, which we discussed would also end up reducing our operating budget. That would push us further up towards 8 to 10%, up the 8 to 10% graph. Is that correct?
we are not counting on the 2 million in this projection. It's in there at the
This
full
is
amount.
with,
Says the whole.
well, this doesn't show revenue at all.
Right, but in terms of a payment, we aren't even counting on the 2 million.
If we, yeah, I guess I'm not hearing this right. If we don't get the $2 million in, that is money that's got to come out of our operating budget, correct? If we're not paying for it out of donations, it's coming out of operating budget, right?
That's projected right there, but the 2 million is not coming into our budget. That's coming into the Friends of the Library's budget that will be donated to the city.
Yes, and then we can
Okay.
then we'll have it to pay this down, right?
Correct,
And
before
so
we
if-
bond.
Yeah, and so if we don't have it, we still have to bond, we still have to pay it, and it's got to come from corresponding cuts in other departments.
No, it's right
right
here. It's right here.
Yeah, so
No, that doesn't show revenue at all.
no, it doesn't have to show revenue. What it shows is the debt, and it's the 100% library debt. So if there's money, if it comes in less, if there's value engineering, that's less. If there's donations made, that's less, then the borrowing and bonding is less. Therefore, that's the maximum cost for the library.
That's the maximum cost for the library. But if we have to pay for that cost out of money that we would otherwise be using for operating, right? That pushes us up the graph.
Counselor,
no,
I
no, it doesn't.
I think you're mistaken in this case. I believe that the library, Friends of the Library funding is not included in this graph, and that
That's correct.
it would lower the item, but there is no worst-case scenario of what happens if the library doesn't fund it, because the library funding is not in the graph. Counselor Dolan?
Just to further clarify, any dollar that the Friends of the Library contribute towards the library lowers
The bond, the issuance of the
bar-
bonds,
the issuance
correct.
of the
Yep.
bond. So that actually can only go down. It will never go up related to,
It can't go up.
it can't go up.
It cannot go up.
Yes, that's what
You can't
I thought.
exceed what you voted. Yeah.
Counselor Mass?
I'm not being clear. My question is not about this graph. My question is about this graph, the 6 million. Maybe you can bring it up on the screen. This assumes 2% is being spent annually. If we have $1 million left, if we have 2 million less to spend because we have, or the percentage over the period of time, if we have less money to spend on operating because we have less revenue,
It's not our revenue.
it's not, it is revenue. Money that gets donated to the town is revenue that can be expended. It absolutely is revenue.
But we certainly aren't counting on that each year in our operating budget.
So you're planning on spending 2 million from the town and then still spending additional money to make up the 2%? You're going to spend it on something else?
No,
I,
no. I don't know how else to explain it.
Counselor Dolan?
I just want to recognize that this meeting is getting more heated than I'm comfortable with. We're dealing with some difficult issues here, so I would just ask that everyone be civil with the permission of the chair. I will ask that.
Do we have other questions from counselors? Counselor Mayo.
Microphone, grab a mic.
Mike.
Oh, here, you know what, take this one.
Oh, we got an extra.
Thank you. Given the things about, this goes back to the former DPW worker or director, and his sole, or I shouldn't say sole, thing that he talked about was the solid waste cost and how expensive it was going to be for Greenfield on a regular basis, yearly basis, because there was being less and less places to store the solid waste, and that it was going to be that much more of an expense for Greenfield if we didn't reinvest in a solid waste, I forgot what
Sludge.
digester?
Yeah.
Digester.
Yeah, and that, but that doesn't cover the cost of transporting the solid waste. Isn't that correct?
The proposal for an anaerobic digester is to reduce the cost of transporting, hauling, and transportation.
And have other towns come in?
The whole plan is, actually, it's be coming up in your capital budget, $7.3 million for the anaerobic digester on the Greenfield site on Deerfield Street at the treatment plant. We were in discussion with several communities. They're all saying the same thing, that if Greenfield is going to do this, they need to vote it, and then we'll consider it. So we have a design of 20,000 gallons per day, and we need a number of communities to participate. They will all save, just like we will save. Our cost for disposal went from 170,000. I remember Don Willett estimated 440,000. He was off by about 10%. It's a little over 400,000 now. And so we just received news 2 days ago, unfortunate news, that there are only 3 locations in New England that we've been going to. We're down to 1, working with the FERCog on a collaborative contract in Lowell, and they're closing March 4th. That would be next Tuesday. So we do have a dilemma crisis there. They're closing for 2 weeks to clean up, bring it up to date, and we're assuming that we're going to be back on track and still be one of the invited guests to Lowell with our hauling.
My truck is unavailable. Thank you.
Lindsay Rowe had brought up a point, since Counselor Ellis and Counselor Mass had asked about the history, that on the website, there is a history of the debt as a percent of the operating budget. We can email you that link if that would be helpful.
I think that'd be great.
Please do.
Okay.
For now, can you see it? I can't see it.
Okay. Where the heck did it go? There we go. Okay, this starts at 2008, and in 2008 and 9, it was 8.7%.
Okay.
And it goes through the years. There were years also where it was lower, but I believe there's another graph that shows we used a lot of one-time to fund projects. There's another graph there that shows that. And the mayor can probably.
Yeah.
Oh, are you bringing it up, Lindsay? That's awesome.
No, she was bringing up Victoria's Secret's closet. Yeah. Yeah, keep going down.
It's all outside or inside?
I assume that's outside.
Do we know when this chart is from, Lindsay? Okay.
And And is that graph, let's see, overall towns,
All debt service.
within the guidelines in the debt policy to maintain appropriate level of investment. So my question is that a percentage of the operating budget in each one of those corresponding years? Because starting in 2011, it was 7.9, obviously. Going back 10 years would be 2009, so yeah, 8.7 to 8.4. So at 4.1 in 2016, under the theory that when you lower it, that money gets eaten up, well, then where did that gap of money get put in the budget? Do we know? Where it dropped down from 2010 as it's going down, down, down? Because as we know, the budget was going up the whole time. So I'm just curious.
Definitely would have to look at the operating budgets in those years. Sorry.
Okay.
So a constant also for the, Mr. Chair, constant also is that the budget was increasing at roughly 1.1 million a year. I don't know what percentage that is offhand.
Right.
I'm not, I'm going to have to look at 14, 15, 16, and 17. I don't think those are accurate.
Yeah, they don't look it. Counselor Alice?
So since this is the first time I think we're all seeing it, if you don't have the answer, that's
Been
okay.
on the website for 2 years.
You've seen it?
I s-
Okay. Well, it's the first time that I'm seeing it because I did not know it was on the website. So above or below 5 to 10% policy levels, what is that, what policy is that referencing?
That's referencing, that's a report from, what was that company? Elizabeth Braccier signed this up to some company, and their conditions were anything above or below 5 to 10% policy levels was not good. That was a,
So is-
you'd have to.
Counselor Mass?
So you heard me say 5 to 10% before, because I've seen this graph before, and I've heard us say 5 to 10% many years. When did the policy change from 5 to 10% to 8 to 10%? Because until the library discussion, I've never heard that.
What is the difference between 5 and 10 and 8 and 10?
Yeah, when did that policy change take place, and why? Because that creates a range, that narrows the range by 3% of the entire operating budget.
I actually think this is an error. I think the 5 to 10% discussion had to do with EQV and capacity. That's how that was explained several times, and 8 to 10% was the debt line item. So we can go back and look at the policy. The policy was developed by Len Kelly in around 2010, 2011, I think. Lynn, have you seen anything about 5 or 10%? This is from a,
The
like a
only
Standard and
communication,
Poor's.
again, I've been with the town for less than a year, and when I came back and we had the discussions about policies, I was told it's an 8 to 10%.
Yeah.
So what you've changed in the past, or where these numbers come from, I can't speak to that.
Right, and this comes back to what I think you said earlier, where it might make sense to codify this and this our best practice in some way, whether it's perhaps in the charter or wherever, so that we don't come back to this rather confusing discussion. Counselor Alice, did you have a question?
It was more of a comment, but I don't think it
All right,
matters at this point.
I'm going to ask a question about, we started to talk about restructuring the debt, about what this graph would look like. Would it just look like a more, and I think, I'm sorry, we don't have it up there. I'm not talking, for the members of the public, I'm not talking about the graph that's on the screen. I'm talking about the one that we looked at earlier, projected debt payments. Would it look like a more gradual line rather than the
The
big
goal would
jumps
be
in?
not to see that spike
Yeah,
in '24 and '25.
yeah,
Correct.
okay. Very good. Counselor Alice?
So to not see the spike in '24 and '25, I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
I'd really like to see that graph, because I'd like to see what the jump is in that graph, because we're about, 2, 4, 6, about 600,000 below the 8% in 2023 anyway. So there's going to be, if you want to stay at the 8%, you're at least going to be 600,000 in 2024 of a jump.
Lynn, would you mind speaking about, I believe it was Lexington, who had structured their debt to, for when the facility fee was going to kick
Oh,
in?
it was a regional school district.
Oh, regional
that,
school district, okay.
That has I won't get into the whole thing, but for whatever reason, they have an assessment that they can do a capital assessment to non-member communities coming in to the brand-new school that they're building, and however, they cannot assess those fees until they have an occupancy permit. Obviously, to capture the low market rate, and it was a pretty significant sized project. They wanted to go to the market sooner than later and not wait for occupancy. So what the law and the IRS allows you to do is make minimal principal payments, if you will, minimal being, in this case, $5,000 principal payments for 2 to 3 years into the project. That's one way, just as one example of what you can do in structuring it, something like that. Something could be, maybe you delay going into the market, so maybe you just have interest expense. Maybe it's a combination of both.
Councilor Mass.
In almost all of those circumstances, whether you're paying less in principal or you're delaying going in the market, doesn't it actually increase your overall interest payment and the overall cost of the project?
Well, it does. It's, and that's what you look at, though. You look at where it is on your budget, what best fits in there. In some cases, if you issue level debt, okay, and you get to some large school programs, just like the one I mentioned to you, is instead of issuing level principal, where you have, you're socking the taxpayer with high principal, and then it decreases, you're hitting those taxpayers up in the front years pretty hard. Level debt service, people, and this is, again, it's a policy decision of what you want to look at. If you issue level debt, yes, you are paying more interest because you're not maturing the principal as quickly. However, then some people make the argument, well, in this case, this is a 30-year, useful life asset. So why shouldn't everybody have a contribution to the payment? I can't sit here, there's different ways that you can structure these things. But at the end, it becomes, what is the town comfortable with? What is the town comfortable with its taxpayers?
Thanks. Councilor Alice.
And that leads to what my frustration's been on the project, because, we're having this meeting almost 3 months after we were being asked to vote on the project. This meeting should have happened 6 months ago, before the project, and we should have had whatever plan that we're going to use to go forward, we should have laid out, and it should say, this is what we're going to do. And the problem is, we've gotten one set of numbers, one spreadsheet, then we got another one in between. There's been newspaper articles that have different numbers. The frustration that I'm feeling about being able to be comfortable with this is that we should be able to have the plan in front of us, and we should be able to question that plan and decide whether we're going to do it. But what we actually are getting is, well, there's multiple ways we can do it, so we can do it this way, we can do it that way, but the answers I'm looking for are the ramifications of doing it whichever way we're going to do it. And, I just really feel like, now tonight we've got this graph, and now we're saying, but we can change this graph, we can do it differently. I just would really like to see whatever the plan, whatever way we're going to do it, laid out so that we can look at it and ask the questions, because it feels like every time we ask questions, the plan changes, and then we have to ask those questions again. And now here we are sitting here tonight, and it's happening again. The paper gets the fire department study before the council gets it. And we get it at 4 o'clock on the night of this meeting, so we haven't even been able to look at it. We've got new debt charts that aren't the same as the old debt charts tonight. We can't ask questions, appropriately, and we can't ask educated questions when we get this stuff 5 minutes into our meeting. And I just feel like we're going to ask all the questions on this, and then we're going to get something in 5 days that's going to be completely different. And then I'm going to want to ask questions about that to see what's going on with that. So if we're choosing to do it the other way, can we get that information and then, but see, now we're supposed to be voting on this on March 20th. Are we going to get that information March 19th? I just really want to get the information. I really want to be able to understand it before we get to voting day. That's my frustration.
I hear your frustration, Counselor, but speaking personally, I can't speak for other counselors. I don't take everything under my responsibility as a counselor. I wouldn't expect to be responsible for structuring the debt payments on this. I would appreciate the information as it's given and some consultation, but I personally feel that it's micromanaging to have that level of oversight. I'll take questions from Councilor Dolan and then Councilor Mass.
I just want to push back a little bit against what Councilor Alice had said. I actually feel like I had, if not this exact graph 4 or 5 months ago, I had something very similar. It hasn't really changed that much. And what the graph is, and I've understood this from the beginning, is the finance team's best estimate at the worst case scenario. I feel like it's not fair to ask clairvoyance. It's not fair to ask the finance team to predict what the future is actually going to look like. This is a worst case scenario. We've spent a good bit of this meeting going over other potential scenarios that are even worse. So I feel like Director Gilman is in a situation where she gives us a worst case scenario, then it's not accurate enough. But if she gives us an accurate scenario, then we have to spend the whole meeting talking about the worst case scenarios. So this information is actually plenty sufficient for me to get a sense of what the future might look like. And I would like to thank the folks who prepared it.
Councilor Mass.
I'm going to agree with Councilor Dolan. I think this gives us a sense, but I'm also going to disagree with the chairman about whether or not it's the role of the council to be looking at how debt is structured, because how debt is structured impacts everything else we do. Last year, we cut $400,000 from the operating budget in order to give that amount, or close that amount, to the schools, approximately. And then the mayor unilaterally did a short-term borrowing in a way he said he wasn't going to do, which cost $640,000, which we had to pay, and negated all of the work that we did. It is important to know how debt is going to be managed so we know how the operating budget is going to be handled. And what is somewhat difficult in this process is that the council has no control whatsoever of how this debt is structured. Once we appropriate it, the mayor and his team can structure it any way they want. And that's the way municipal government works. It's not the mayor's fault that he has flexibility. That is generally a good thing. But it does make our job more difficult. And if we think that this is not going to impact our ability to how we're going to deal with the operating budgets going forward, whether we get money in from the library for fundraising, whether or not we get money in from a parking garage, whether or not we get everything else, this will affect our ability to handle the operating budget, and it will affect it will impact it, and it'll impact it in ways that we have no control over, because the executive, it won't be this mayor, it may not be the next mayor, it'll be a mayor that many of us may not even know the name of yet, who will make those decisions. And so having a plan that we can hold future leaders accountable to, I think, is helpful, because we can say, hey, this is what we were expecting when we voted this back then. Why are you deviating from that plan? We think that's a good deviation or a bad deviation, and this is how we should handle it. It is very important for everyone to know what they're getting up front. I think we're unfortunately running up against a timeline where it is impossible to get that information. And I want to be fair to the mayor's office. He came forward with a plan, a very specific plan for a lease agreement, a lease buy agreement that we rejected. So to the extent that we don't have all of the information coming in on the cost of the fire station before this grant, some of that responsibility lays with the council in rejecting the mayor's initial plan. And if we're going to go forward after having rejected that initial plan, we are making a proactive decision to make a decision in good faith based on not having complete information, and we may get in trouble down the road when we're looking at appropriating the money for the fire station, because this appropriation doesn't appropriate that. But I do think that everyone who's been involved in this on all sides has been working in good faith. That includes councilors who have been really concerned about the finances and the debt and the operating budget. It also includes the mayor's office and putting together the best plan that we rejected.
Well said. Thank you for that. I'm just going to note now that we're about 90 minutes into this special Ways and Means meeting. There is no accumulation outside, and I know at least one of us probably has to travel back to Eastern Massachusetts. So I'd like to limit the discussion somewhat, but I want to make sure that councilors and the public feel comfortable that our most important questions have been answered. So I'll take more questions.
I just wanted to sort of respond to that, but I will defer if the chair would like if there are no more questions for our financial advisor, that she could make her way back to Eastern Mass, but because I don't believe that I have any more, and
Stay. I don't mind staying, so.
just trying to help you out.
I know, thank you, I appreciate it.
That's up to you.
I saw one down, yeah.
All right, go ahead, Councilor
In that case, I
Alice.
guess, I just wanted to respond to Councilor Mass's, he's exactly right. We did reject the public safety complex lease agreement. I think we did that rightfully. I think everyone had very thoughtful debate and discussion about it. But I will say that on page 7 of the grant application, it states specifically, Mayor Martin has assured the library that even if the town council does not approve the plans for a new public safety complex, he will move the fire department to a temporary location and make way for the construction of the new library. We later found out that there was no temporary place. So now I'm feeling like we are stuck in we just need to do something. So we got the fire department study, and that's the something that's going to work to allow the library to be there. But it may not be the right something because we don't have the chance to talk about it. So the fact is, whether we didn't do the public safety complex or not, I'm not sure that the library grant, not sure the library would have submitted a grant had they known that this was going to be an issue, where the firehouse library issue was the same thing. So I just wanted to respond to that point made by Councilor Mass.
Councilor Dolan.
I'm just curious, how long would it take to create a graph like this with the debt structured in a realistic way, to level out some of those major spikes? Is that something we could get in a week, or is that something that would take
Absolutely.
months?
No,
Okay.
no, not at all.
Would you mind?
No.
And again, we're not asking you to predict the future, but just some kind of more realistic, more level picture of how we could structure it and the additional interest costs that we would end up paying in the long run. Is that, if you're willing?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And the only other thing that we had mentioned at the beginning was that I was using the 12 and a half. So that I will reduce that accordingly,
Yeah.
but to the 10 million.
I think
Just so we
having,
know when we're looking at,
having
the
both in
numbers,
front of us
yeah.
would be, having the realistic picture and the
What's
worst
that?
case picture would be helpful.
It says 10.5 million.
10.5. I had 12.5.
No, it does say 12 there for
Yeah.
the fire.
I know it's 10.5,
But in
but
the-
the plan is.
The plan says
Yes,
9.5 to 10, right.
All right, thanks in advance for providing that.
With the counselor, there are other number changes in there that were higher than probable. The general obligation bond for FY '21 is noted at 3.5. That's primarily the CIP, the Capital Investment Program. I'm expecting that to come in less than 3.5. That's over 2 years, so that would be roughly 1.75 each year. We're not going to do that 1.75 this year. It'll be up to the next mayor to decide what to do with the other 1.75.
I think I can speak for other counselors in saying that any updates that improve the accuracy will be appreciated.
Thank you.
And if we could just get a list of the changes that were made, just so we can be aware.
All right, do we have any remaining questions? Counselor Alice?
I guess I could just expound a little bit on Counselor Dolan. If there are, I guess we've talked about a lot of things tonight. Can we get them all? I mean, can we have so we have this graph, which is worst case, but then we've talked about the level. I mean, if there's, just can we have all of the information so that so that we can have it in front of us the next time, which is probably going to be the council meeting, to be able to look at. You know what I'm saying?
Ahead of time.
Yeah.
If there are more than
one
if there are more than this
scenarios.
scenario and the other scenario, whatever.
We would like them all.
I'd like to see them if we're going to get the.
Yeah, it's fine.
I will say what the financial advisor recommends as possibilities, and I think
Yeah.
we could all think that's reasonable. So,
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
so
Then-
really, it just involves changing what the payments are in that one column for that.
Exactly,
particular-
exactly, and also
Amounts in-
and also, just for me, if you would double check the whole excess capacity question.
Oh, I will, for
just to
sure.
ma- just to-
I'll actually
'cause
get
I
you
would-
an official ruling. How's
Yeah,
that?
I really hope that you're right.
All right, thank you all from Town Hall, and thank you, Ms. Walsh, for coming out here. Thank you, counselors, for asking your questions. I think at this point, we're gonna move on from this. I think this has been a productive meeting. I hope everyone else feels that it has. I think that's about all for now. We have no other business. Our next meeting is going to be March 20th, and, excuse me, Counselor Alice.
I just have a question. Since we received this today, can the fire department study, can we get a commitment that any questions that we have regarding this can be answered as quickly as possible? Because I know I'm going to read through it, but I can't ask the questions tonight because I don't know what they are.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty skeleton type of proposal, trying to get to the cost and a footprint. So what we haven't done, and we haven't had a chance to meet yet, with the public safety and with, actually, I think they met tonight, and the chiefs, is to define that, you'll see 4 or 5 or 6 pages of square footage per room and use. We want to go over that again. Actually, dispatch is in there, and that's not going to be part of the fire station. So there's things we've got to delete and maybe add, I don't know. But we need to get together with public safety and the chief. So we can answer any questions you have. Throw the questions at us. Always copy the public safety Chair, if you would, and then we'll get back to you when we come to some answers ourselves. If you want to be part of that team, you're more than welcome. We meet during the day. I don't know if you can make that, but the Public Safety Commission meets for business at 5 o'clock on the Wednesdays.
Very good. One more question from Councilor Mass.
There's a question for the chairman. I know you indicated our next meeting is March 20th. We are about to move into, I suspect we're about to move into the budget cycle. It sounds like we're going to get capital and operating all in one budget this year.
I'm hoping we'll have capital by Monday.
So I'm just wondering when we might see a proposed Ways and Means schedule for the budget season so that I can just mark my calendar.
I was actually planning on speaking with Mark Smith to schedule, and I'm hoping for April, and I will be in touch. Or Town Hall will be in touch as soon as possible. I'll try to see if we can schedule that this week. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
And we are adjourned.
All of our productions at GCTV are sponsored in part by Bay State Health, providing the care you and your family need when you need it close to home. Visit them online at baystatehealth.org. Greenfield Savings Bank. Visit them at 400 Main Street in Greenfield. Call them at 774-3191 or go online to greenfieldsavings.com. Greenfield Community College, providing access and excellence in higher education in the Pioneer Valley. Visit them at gcc.mass.edu. The Hammond Family. The Hammond family are longtime supporters of Greenfield Community Television. New Fortune Chinese Restaurant on the Mohawk Trail in Greenfield. Visit them online at newfortunema.com. Call them at 772-0838 and check them out on Facebook. Real Cleaning Services, cleaning Hampshire and Franklin County since 1972. We don't cut corners, we clean them. Check them out online at realclean.com. Call them at 413-422-1143. People's United Bank, located at 45 Federal Street in Greenfield. You can call them at 774-3713 or visit them online at peoples.com. The Solar Store of Greenfield, replacing fossil fuels and nuclear power one home at a time. Visit them at 23 Fisk Ave. Call them at 413-772-3122 or visit them online at solarstoreofgreenfield.com. Thank you to our sponsors for supporting all of GCTV's productions.